Hello and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine, and I'm joined today by a cast of merry men, including Sebastian Stafford-Bloor. Hi, Seb.
Hello, Joe Devine.
How are your gates this morning?
Yeah, they are fine.
Well, just fine. There we go. Mr. Toad joined us. Hello, JJ Bull the Bullet. How's things?
Hello. Do you think Mr. Toad will catch on? No.
I don't know. I think Mr. Toad caught on in the past. John Mackenzie also here. Hi, John. And a happy birthday to you for yesterday.
Thank you, mate.
Well, you're welcome. And also Steve Hankey's here. Hi, Steve.
Morning. Or hello.
Well, yes, okay. That answers the question of whether Steve should talk again on today's podcast. Anyway, it's a spooky edition because, of course, it's Halloween as we record. So hopefully there'll be, some ghosts in the machine. What does that mean again? Hopefully there won't be any of those.
I've not brought the skeleton into the studio.
Yeah, it would have been good
on this spookiest of days. I'm feeling very spooky today.
Why don't you grab the skeleton and he can stand behind you while I do the rest of the intro?
Now.
Yeah, okay, you get the skeleton. And for viewers of today's podcast, watching us on the YouTubes, you'll note that I'm not in the studio, I'm at home. And that's because I put my back out lifting a Hoover. A very spooky incident indeed. Anyway, it was a spooky affair, the football this weekend as well, of course. Lots of giant killings, including Chelsea down, Liverpool down. We'll be talking about those games. We'll talk a little bit about Aston Villa and their new manager. Manchester United scraped a victory at West Ham. We'll discuss that a little bit. And of course, we'll head to the continent to talk about Juventus, potentially some Barcelona, and potentially a little bit of Lionel Messi. But if you like all those things and you want to be afraid on a daily basis, then you should subscribe to The Athletic. theathletic.com/Tifo, theathletic.com/Tifo, where the quality of the journalism is so stunning that it's scary because of how good it is. Also, one more thing I'd like to say, we're getting perilously close now. I believe it's two weeks away from the Tifo book being released. Tifo's How to Watch Football, 52 Rules for something, a subtitle I can't remember. I can never remember the subtitle, Seb. What's the subtitle of the book that we've just written?
For How to Watch Football, yeah. So it's just 52 rules for enjoying the beautiful game.
Is it enjoying?
On this spooky day, I choose to believe it's enjoying.
Yeah, okay, fine. Well, anyway,
it's counterbalancing the skeleton.
There'll be pre-order links and stuff in the description. It's really good. We really like it. Seb has written most of it. John and JJ have contributed as well. Sister Alice has designed it all, but there's included illustrations from all of the people that work at Tifo. We're very, very proud of it. And it comes out just ahead of the World Cup. It's a perfect Christmas gift, I would say, for anyone. And it's also, whilst it's not a children's book, it is child appropriate. So, you can safely get it for the children in your life. Anyway, thanks for that. We're very proud of that. Fine. I will leave you now in the warm hands and the cool embrace of Jacques de Bones, the spooky skeleton. Where else to begin but Brighton and Hove Albion 4. 1 Chelsea, John. De Zerbi finally getting his first victory with Brighton. An impressive game, wasn't it? Did you enjoy it?
I did. I am a big fan of Roberto De Zerbi because I have to play up to my hipster credentials. So yeah, nice to see him doing well. It will be great to see him have a good career at Brighton. I'm looking forward to seeing the ideas that he likes to put up across in his teams slowly coming through.
Have we started to see those yet, do you think? Because, it's been a little bit of a rough start for him. And it's hard. It's always hard, when a new manager arrives, particularly at a club. Quite an unusual thing when a good manager leaves with the team are doing well. That's not that common, to be honest, these days. And replacing them with another good manager, sometimes you think it might take a little bit longer to start to see those ideas come through. Or what of Potter's stuff that De Zerbi keeps, what he wants to change. Have you noticed any sort of significant changes yet?
Yeah, both managers are similar in respect to the fact that they're both going to try and build up in certain situations. Now, the way that they're going to build up is different times. De Zerbi is famous for really overloading the deeper areas when he wants to build up. But again, I would describe both managers as sort of problem solvers in that sense, that they're going to see opposition presses as a problem to be solved, and they're going to think of creative ways of doing that. So there is that similarity there between the way that the two of them play. And we did see that happening in this game against Chelsea, but I thought Brighton were really quite direct in this game. So they were building up, but they were trying to get forward as quickly as possible, trying to get the ball into wide areas to I guess, get into the spaces behind the Chelsea wing backs. And yeah, it worked out quite well. I mean, there's an element of luck insofar as, I mean, they got the goal very early on, so Trossard scored in about 5 minutes, I think. And then they got an own goal from a corner from Ruben Loftus-Cheek. So, and then that was 15 minutes-ish. And so Chelsea were 2-0 down very quickly in the proceedings. And I think it was just tough for them to really get back after this. And I've seen a few Chelsea fans online actually talking about how when Chelsea do go behind like that with this squad, it does feel as though they do sort of roll over a little bit. So I suspect a lot of this comes down to the fact that there was those 2 goals early on, which really put them in the driving seat. There was another own goal later on actually, and I think I'm right in saying that until Pascal Gross scored in injury time, pretty much all of the goals that had been scored for De Zerbi at Brighton had been either Leandro Trossard or own goals.
Yeah, I think the first 5 were all Trossard, weren't they? Yeah,
who's having an absolutely banging season right now, actually. So he's a long-term love interest of mine. So it's nice to see him doing well.
I loved his first goal, the calmness to sort of take it around the goalkeeper, and then although you would imagine shooting on an empty net is straightforward when there's 2 big defenders in the way, him hitting it, into the sort of far post and in was great. Seb, as well as Brighton played, Chelsea they just seemed kind of all over the place. Thiago Silva made a couple of amazing goal line clearances early on, but it was real sort of edge of the seat stuff. They looked a little soft.
I think I'd use the word sloppy, Joe. So the Thiago Silva clearance you referenced actually came from a really bad mistake by him. So depending on which camera angle you can find, he's trying to play out from just the edge of his own box, and it's really difficult to see who he's aiming at. He chops his pass out sort of diagonally right, leaves it short, and that's the move from which he has to make the clearance. Ordinarily, when that kind of thing happens, you see, I mean, it can galvanize the team. People go, "Oh, come on, we're away here. We don't want to get under the pump and find ourselves in a hole." And yet Chelsea never really switched gears even after that. It felt like one of those games in which once Brighton, I don't know, there was no. I'm running the risk of sounding a little bit Graham Sounessy here, and I don't want to use the phrase "wanted it more," really trying to edge around it. But it was one of those kind of things. If you look in that first 20 minutes at some of the 50-50s, some of the tackles, some of the intensity, Brighton win absolutely everything. And at the time, it feels a little bit inconsequential because you're waiting for Chelsea to play their way into the game. But all of the direct moments that John talked about feel like, Brighton's moves forward are a little bit quicker now than they used to be. I don't know whether that's De Zerbi or whether that's just the evolution of what Potter left. But Chelsea looked happy to be beaten. And they seemingly accepted at 2-0 when sort of Loftus-Cheek sort of dangles a leg and then just deflects it into his own net. It's almost like a switch goes off there and you think, right, well, we've lost this game. And it's kind of hard to watch given the kind of the resources there. And it's particularly unusual when you've got a new manager because they came into the game unbeaten. And it was really, I don't know, I understand all the kind of the energy momentum is with Brighton and the crowd's kind of baying for Potter because they feel a little bit let down by him leaving, but also him ripping out the club's technical structure on his way out. I get that. But then there's a challenge there too for Chelsea. And it was really disappointing actually, because I was really looking forward to the game. I love watching Brighton. John talked about his long-term crush. I think one of my short-term crushes is Kara Mitoma, the Japanese winger that Brighton have. He's a lovely player. He's one of those guys that sort of, when he carries the ball, he kind of glides with it and he just unbalances defenders on either side. He's got a really nice, touch of pass and weight of pass. But I was kind of looking forward to it as a contest and it never really developed into one.
Yeah, okay.
Go on, to come back to Mitoma, it's interesting the way that Brighton are developing players. So Mitoma is a player who they bought from, I think it's Kawasaki Frontale in Japan, brought him over and then sent him on loan last season to Union Saint-Gallen Saint-Gallois,
Saint-Gilloise,
in Belgium. And what they've done this with loads of players. So they bring them in from smaller leagues where there might be a big step up into the Premier League. They send them away for a season and bring them back, and they just seem ready-made for the Premier League. So they've done that with a number of different players now, and it's just a really decent way of developing players. So props to David Weir, I think is the loans manager over there at the moment. They're doing a good job over there.
Yeah. David Weir? Like the ex-Scotland
Oh.
defender. Ah, cool.
There we go. So let me come back to you for 1 second, because you already mentioned that the Brighton home crowd seemed a little bit more than displeased with Graham Potter. A lot of booing. He was quite keen in the post-match interview afterwards, or at least he appeared to have felt that a little bit keenly, because he made the point of saying he doesn't think he's done anything wrong. And I sort of agree with him. I mean, is it okay for it to just be sort of part of the pantomime of football supporters and it's all meant in jest or whatever, or is it kind of ridiculous that he was booed like that?
Well, there's a different way of looking at it in that, yes, it was directed at Graham Potter, but I think what people are raging against is kind of one of the realities and truisms of modern football, which is that as soon as a big club takes a liking or a fancy to something that's shiny, they take it, and what's left. Okay, at the moment, De Zerbi looks like he might be a success, and stylistically, I'm really looking forward to what he might do at Brighton. I think he has a good chance of building on the work that's been done. At the same time, however, how many times in the past have you seen, right, we're going to take that manager now, and everything else can burn as a result because it's not our problem as the big club? And no, I got a lot of sympathy. I agree with Graham Potter in that he doesn't really have much to apologise for, because, of course, he was going to take that opportunity. For someone like that, with a non-traditional journey through football management, how often are you going to get the opportunity to manage a club like Chelsea, to earn what he's likely to earn there, to coach on that sort of stage? I get it, but it's okay to be annoyed about it, because this is one of the inequalities of the game, in that you can buy into a project. You can, goodness, what's it been like to be a Brighton fan in the past couple of years? It must have been wonderful to see, based on where the club were 20 years ago, what they've been through, and to see them playing the kind of football and winning the sort of admiration they are. And then because there's been a falling out or a disagreement between the new billionaire owner and the Champions League winning coach, you have to suffer. I get it. It's just part of the football, and it's a horrible thing, but it's just unfortunate that Graham Potter is the target of it. I understand that too.
Pascal Gross is listed as playing at right back in this game. Is that correct?
Didn't feel like it.
Well, this is the thing. So it's one of these things where the team sheet doesn't actually represent what you see on the pitch.
Yeah.
Because there's no formations are they don't really exist in a lot of teams now. It's just players in different positions at different phases of play.
Don't say that before my next question, JJ, because my next question is that Sterling and Pulisic played at wing back. So I wanted to ask you about that because it didn't seem to work. I think the fellas on Match of the Day noted also that this had been tried in the last sort of 3 games and had been sort of scrapped. Or maybe that was Mark Cucurella at left centre back, but something along these lines have been tried in the last few games and then sort of scrapped around half time or in the second half as it wasn't really working. Sterling and Pulisic at wing back to me seems like the sort of thing I would have done on FIFA 10 years ago. Is it that weird, or is that, what's the thinking behind it?
Well, you want to get all your best players on the pitch at the same time.
That was my FIFA thinking. Yeah.
But there is like thinking behind it. And the idea should be that if you think you can control the game, and I mean, Graham Potter obviously knows quite a lot about Brighton, so he could know where he could control the game and where he might get advantages. So you play Sterling and Pulisic on the wings, so they are your wide players to give you width out wide, obviously, which then creates space in the middle, hopefully for your boxman field that they've got there. And it changes from, it's a different defensive shape to when they're in attack. Obviously, in defence, you don't really want Raheem Sterling as your left wing back or your left back, but he's not really. It's Mark Cucurella. So, and the thing you saw them then get taken out a little bit was that this is a team learning how to play Potter's style against one that had already. No, they're deviating it from it now. But Cucurella and Chalobah coming very far out of where they're supposed to try and help overload the midfield part of the pitch. But then that leaves space out wide for someone else, and then maybe Pulisic and Sterling aren't quite aligned with tactically what they're supposed to be doing right now. And if you can take advantage of that and you're super motivated, like you can't really get a more motivated team than you would get that Brighton team against Chelsea. Like the manager's coming back, the crowd are right up against it. You've got that massive advantage straight away. So you do have, looks like a team who wants it more against another one. Like Chelsea don't care that much about playing against Brighton. They're not expecting that to be a huge, massive battle. Yeah. It's basically Potter versus Brighton. It's not really Chelsea. That doesn't really matter. So I think that gives them a bit of an advantage there. Tactically, when you get these players in, it should mean that you have more of the ball. You've got those great players in attacking positions, and then you've got Chalobah and Cucurella on either side of the central centre back. So you should sort of be fine. But then, like John's saying, I mean, the first goal is a bit of a stramash in the box, and Trossard does really well. Trossard, who's playing as a wing back under Potter, now playing as a central striker here, with Pascal Gross listed at right back. Weird. And then 2 own goals. So it's really kind of unfortunate. So although the XG does show that Brighton were way ahead in this game, by quite a lot.
Yes.
It's just one of those. I think it's just one of those that happens now and again.
The wing back thing was really interesting because there's a couple of times, particularly in the first half, where you saw Sterling carry the ball through the middle. Pulisic also, like, the XG point is valid, but Chelsea had a couple of really good chances. Sanchez made 2 really good saves in the first half. Pulisic spooned one wide when he probably definitely should have hit the target. But like, it felt to me initially, at least, like the wing backs were a kind of a pragmatic approach to dealing with Brighton's strength at wing back. And then Pervis Estepan was probably the best player on the pitch from the left. Like, he was the most progressive. Like, he was kind of a force in the game down that side.
Well, this is it. It's the thinking, right, Seb? So if you play attacking wing backs, but you play them as wingers, that's what they're not wing backs, they're wingers.
Yeah.
It's like that old like Cruyff Ajax team, maybe. So the wingers, the wide players are actually just wingers. They're meant to be up top in line with the striker a lot of the time. So that you can control the game that way. And how do you want to defend? Is it deeper, or do you want to defend higher up the pitch? And if you've got those players up there helping with the press, and you've got a box midfield, which is Mount, Gallagher, Kovacic and Loftus-Cheek, control in the middle of the pitch. In theory, you've got real control there. So you've got a back 3 with 2 protecting them. Then the 2 wide wing backs should really be wingers, which gives you more of an attacking over defence kind of mentality, which may be high risk, but you've got better players. Like Chelsea have much better players than Brighton do. And so they should be able to control it more. And Potter knows roughly how they're going to try and build, so where you can control the game there. But it just takes a couple of little errors for that to fall apart. And then once you're 2-0 down, it's really difficult to then, because you naturally, the team who's the lesser talented team, obviously they're a good team, Brighton, but Chelsea have better players. So then they can just sit and they can play in a different sort of way against them. It changes the way the game's managed in that. It might not work just now with the players you've got at that positions, but when you think, like, he was playing Trossard, who is really a forward as a wing back all the time. That's what Potter was doing. So why couldn't Sterling do that? Why couldn't Pulisic do it?
Sure.
I think they've got a problem with Sterling insofar as they've just spent £50 million on him.
Yeah, me too.
And the big question is, where do you fit him into this team? And we've seen him try to play it. We've seen Potter try to play him as an outside forward, but obviously the outside forwards that Potter likes to play end up being quite narrow, as you've already said. Like, they are playing a box midfield. You've got someone like Mason Mount. He's really good to play in that sort of situation, and Sterling's usually just played on the other side. So yeah, I think the idea is that you drop him into those wing back positions because it allows you to play to his upside a little bit more, which is running into space or getting in behind wide players.
Yeah,
it's just not happening so much for him at the moment. Whether or not that's because the team aren't building up the way that Potter wants them to and getting into those sorts of situations. I'm really struggling to take you seriously with a skeleton hanging off you.
For listeners, you won't be able to see this, but you can hear that JJ has a skeleton's arm around his shoulder there. That's what John...
I got the skeleton in the studio.
I keep looking up and he's just sitting there innocently looking at me with a skeleton's arm around his shoulder, so I apologise.
Go on, Seb.
No, it just felt at times like all the points that John's made are fair. I just wonder whether playing Sterling at wing back is a little bit about, if you think about sort of the forward components at Chelsea, so someone like Aubameyang, whose tendency is always to move either from left to right or left to inside, or from central positions and kind of drop a little bit wide. What you have with Sterling is someone that's super comfortable getting into the penalty box. Like, if you think about the kind of classic goal he'd score at Manchester City, he was a exclamation point, wasn't he? He would get on the end of moves. And so you've injected that into the formation, but then it feels like you've outthought yourself, because as a result of the stuff that you don't have, i.e. the focal point, the big number 9 that you kind of could play around and operate around, you need a kind of compensatory piece to accommodate, I don't know, Aubameyang's movement. Havertz is a pretty decent false 9, but he's not a number 9, is he? And he doesn't have the positional tendencies of a number 9. And so you kind of have this betwixt and between situation where Sterling plays as a wing back, but he doesn't offer you the things that you need from it in this game, which is to kind of restrict someone like Pervis Estepan. Love saying his first name, Pervis. There aren't enough Pervises.
Pervis Estupinian.
Pervis.
I would like to say Havertz did a pretty good impression of a number 9 with that headed goal, though, didn't he? Congratulations to him. A little bit of housekeeping here from Steve Hankles. David Weir, John, was Brighton's loan manager, but he's now their technical director, being internally promoted when Dan Ashworth left the club for Newcastle. So I hope you can enjoy that little piece of slam down literature there. What a fool you are for not keeping up with the news. Thanks, Steve Hankles. Moving on, Liverpool.
David Weir would have been the loan manager last season when Mitoma was at Saint-Gilloise. So
yes,
I'm going to take the win on this one. You don't own me, Steve Hankels.
That's right, Steve.
Is that how you do it, Joe? That's how
I think that's how you do it. And then you say something about his physical appearance, leaving space for you to...
No, I'm not going to do
No?
that.
It feels like quite a cruel area that the podcast is going into there.
Well,
Yeah, I'm
Physical
going
appearance.
to stand up against you, Joe.
there he is, though. I just saw a lovely little shot of him there. Delightful. Anyway, speaking of delightful, Liverpool won 2 Leeds United. Is it delightful? I assume it is for you, John. But let's talk about Leeds now. Deeper Leeds, John. Let's talk about deeper Leeds because Jesse Marsch, there's an argument to say outside of this game, not doing so well. However, the underlying numbers do suggest that Leeds are actually a little bit unlucky, although you're not so sure about that, are you?
Yeah, so I did a video last week just looking at where Leeds are at. They've obviously come off the back of, I think, 2 points in 24, I think, something available, so not a good run. And the big question was, why are Leeds, if Leeds' numbers are so decent, and Leeds should be around mid-table according to the XG data. The question is this just variance? Is this just the happenstance of random luck? Leeds are actually fine, and if you give it long enough, as the argument goes, everything will sort itself out in the end. So I had to look at the numbers a little bit to see what was going on. After having already made the point that Leeds have a really interesting play style, which works well against good teams and less well against less good teams. So there's already context there. And yeah, what I found when I looked at the numbers is that actually if you start digging into game state, so game state is anything that impacts the game and changes the way that the teams might normally play. So that can be anything from, a red card changing the way that teams are going to line up, or a team being maybe 4-0 up, or would obviously change the way that they're going to play as well.
Yeah.
So actually, if you look at the underlying numbers, that Leeds are actually a very average team when they're in an even game state. So when the game is when the team are drawing, they're pretty much, I think 17th was where they were at in terms of their expected goal difference. So there's definitely some kind of context going on here.
When do they play better? What is it? Which game state is it that's bolstering those underlying general numbers?
Yeah, so it's obviously been a small sample size because they've only played, I guess, around 1,000 minutes so far. Yeah, 1,200
minutes. Yeah, 12 games. I was going to say this season. Sorry.
Yes. So when it breaks down, there's obviously like certain game states that they're not in very much. So they looked fairly good in 1-0 up, but they'd only played 71 minutes in that game state. So the other one was when they were 2-0 down. That's when they're at their best in terms of generating XG. And obviously if you're 2-0 down and that's the moment when you're generating your best numbers, then obviously you're not in a good situation.
Can I interpret then what you're saying into human language? If I'm correct, is that obviously when you're 2-0 down in a game and you're chasing a goal, you are much more likely to commit more players forward than you ordinarily would approach a game, 0-0 at the beginning. So you might be likely to create, higher XG chances because you aren't worried about defending as much and you're chasing something. So if Leeds spend a lot of time at 1 or 2 goals down and then create a lot of their XG, higher XG chances in those situations where they're unlikely to then go and actually win the game, that's also not an indication of how they would approach a game from minute 0 at 0-0. Therefore, the higher XG chances they're creating when they're throwing players forward aren't representative of how they would approach a normal game.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth saying as well that in terms of sample sizes, the even game state is the game state that Leeds are in most of the time when they're playing. Because obviously you start off drawing 0-0, so you're going to be starting off in an even game state. And those are the minutes, so the 600 minutes, I think, of that 1,000 where Leeds are in an even game state, and their numbers in those situations just don't seem to be very good. And I think a lot of this comes down to the fact that Leeds have a very specific play style which requires them to attack directly when they have possession of the ball. They don't have the ability to possess the ball when they're in situations. So you might want to think, right, we get to 1-0 up, 2-0 up, we're going to sit on the ball to try and hold it for a little bit longer, stop the opposition from having it. And if you can't do that, all you can do is just be direct, then it means that, okay, you're going to be still generating a lot of chances and a lot of dangerous attacking scenarios, but you're also more likely to turn the ball over and then have the opposition attack at you as well. So I do think there's a game state issue going on here. And I mean, the video itself is arguing that Leeds are good against good teams and not so good good against not so good teams, and that was pretty much the way that this one played out.
Okay. Seb, there's another sort of element to Jesse Marsch here. In his post-match interview, he was very buoyant, obviously, but he spent a lot of time emphasizing the unity of the team. He shouted "we" about 3 times to really emphasize that it was a we, not an I. To emphasize that it was a we. Sorry, that made me laugh. But also there were players that aggressively hugged him after the game. He doesn't seem like a manager who's lost the dressing room at all. Like, the players seem to like him.
Yeah, I'm always a little suspicious of that stuff because there's a lot of adrenaline. It's a big game. It's a big win at Anfield, last minute winner. So I don't know. I mean, I watched an interview with him this morning, which was quite spiky. He was asked about the pressure he was experiencing, I think by Sky's Patrick Davidson. And he was it was one of those where the interviewer asked a sort of lighthearted question, was clearly expecting a little bit of a kind of Frank Lampard chuckle before the answer. And it didn't arrive, and it became a little bit awkward. And I think what I find interesting about him at the moment is that he talks about underlying numbers. It's quite rare that, I mean, it's obviously pretty common on a podcast and on football Twitter, but to hear a manager start talking about, but our underlying numbers are good. I know we've only got, X points in Y games, but, it doesn't really matter. Doesn't really matter, but I'm going to apply my own context. And that's quite a hard sell to a traditional fan.
Yeah.
But I found myself nodding along to some of the things he said, because he made some good points about Leeds' game plan. And he made some good points. He sort of made some good diagnostic points about where Liverpool's weaknesses were. And there was one moment of I felt it was sort of really good coaching at the end, where for the goal that won the game, Brendan Aronson presses 3 different players really, really well within the same sort of 30-second period in the 89th minute of the game. Now, like, a lot of people, we talk about pressing, you think, that's just running and getting in someone's face and making sure that you're showing effort. Whereas in this phase, it was just really precise, actually having an effect on the ball, actually having an effect on Liverpool's exit. And then as soon as the ball came back into the Liverpool defensive zone, we all know what happened next. But I don't know. I don't really have any skin in the kind of the Jesse Marsch Leeds game. It's just that I kind of enjoy the sort of the frankness of being able to discuss things like that, rather than kind of resort to the unlucky here and injury that and bad refereeing decision. And I get it. Like, I obviously understand also that fans have an emotional response to it, but it was interesting to listen to him.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that he's talking about the underlying numbers, and I'm not surprised that he's talking about those, because that's pretty much the only good thing about the last few months of Leeds United, right? So everyone who wants this to be the way that things are going to go in the future are going to have to hang on to those numbers in order to justify Jesse Marsch being there. And I think, again, like, that's fine. That's the way that clubs should operate. They should be looking at the underlying numbers. They should be aware of what is going on. But like I say, if you dig into some of the caveats behind those underlying numbers, then it does sort of paint a slightly different picture. It's an interesting conundrum, right? Because on the field, things don't look great if Leeds are playing non-top 6 sides. And yeah, I think I just find it interesting that clearly the club are hanging on to those underlying numbers now, and they're saying, this is it. Like, we are going to trust the numbers, and we're going to hope that those numbers start leveling out in terms of results, rather than just performances at this point. And I think in a few games' time, we'll have a good sense of whether or not a corner has been turned. I'm not at the point where I think that corner has been turned, because this very much fits my narrative. And my narrative is that we will be good against good sides. And it's those games against smaller teams where we really need to be picking up a lot of points to stay up. I mean, if you look at the numbers now, we're a point above the relegation zone. We have picked up 50% of our points so far against Chelsea and Liverpool. And I just don't think that's a particularly sustainable way of getting points in the Premier League. So I still think there's a lot of work to do. But yeah, interesting to hear that the club are hanging on to those underlying numbers.
Here's the thought, though. If you were to beat every Big Six team, both home and away, that would be 38 points, wouldn't it? Or 36. That's historically, that's enough to stay up. So if you lost to everyone else, Leeds, and you just beat the top 6, home and away, that would be fine. But Seb, go ahead.
Well, no, it's quite an interesting problem to have, because if you're good against top 6 sides, for a side like Leeds at the moment, those are the games when you're going to be televised, and those are the games which are going to attract the biggest neutral audience. So you have one group of people who have one perception of Leeds, like people who perhaps, watch the Liverpool game or watch the Chelsea game, and then a group of fans who watch every game religiously, and that is the majority, because you're not going to, you have 2 or 3 games, a month, every 2 months or so against televised teams that kind of attract the nation's attention, the world's attention. And then you struggle through and try and preach about, underlying numbers this, and in game state that. It's a very difficult argument to win in that way. And it's just a kind of a modern footballism. I'm in that kind of modern football ranty mood today. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I like it. JJ,
okay.
Liverpool.
Lean into it.
I will lean into it. Thank you, Seb. Liverpool, it sort of feels like we're approaching the point at which it is my job to say, are we supposed to talk about Jurgen Klopp? I don't, for the record, hey, for the record, I love that guy, and I don't think we should do that. But it does feel like it's the appropriate time for me to start suggesting that maybe that's a...
Well, this, I think we talked about this a little bit before, but basically all teams, go through cycles, and the team tends to be about a 3-year cycle, and Guardiola's managed to keep his team fresh and everything by bringing new players in and changing it. And Alex Ferguson used to do that, where he would, after a bit of success, he would start to break up the team on purpose, just hack it to bits. So it becomes something new, and you retain these... You retain the intensity and the attention to detail that you need. And what Klopp's spoken about recently is the problems they've had. There's loads and loads of problems. They're all basically defensive, which is caused by not putting enough pressure higher up the pitch. They're pressing far less in the attacking third. In fact, the numbers, last time I saw it, last season they were first or something like that, very close to first in attacking pressures. So pressures in the attacking third. So they're winning the ball very high up the pitch, or they're applying pressure very high up the pitch. This season, it's a marked difference around about mid-table. And that's enormous, which means that inevitably you get more attention on the back line. And then without wanting to pick on Trent Alexander-Arnold, he is being exploited every single time he plays. The first goal, sure enough, it's Joe Gomez, he doesn't look up before he hits the pass. I think it's an accident, and it's so easy for this to happen, just not looking up. But roughly where your teammates are. So for anyone who hasn't seen it, what happens is that Leeds go from back to front very quickly down the left wing. Alexander-Arnold steps forward to try and press the left winger, but I think that's a deliberate decoy to then bring him out of position so that Joe Gomez has to then cover the right back position, which has been happening all season long. It creates a big gap between the right centre back and the left centre back. And so Alexander-Arnold's taken out the late game a little bit. Shouldn't matter, because Gomez has control of the situation and then passes back across his own goal from basically near the touchline, the throw-in line, and it catches out the goalkeeper, and that's how Rodrigo scores. It's a real mistake, and Klopp says that's just an accident. You can't allow for that. But that's a mistake caused by Gomez's error, but it's also tactical, and teams keep doing this thing. So if you pull the right back wide and out of position like Alexander-Arnold does, then the inside midfielder, the left inside midfielder, can then run into that space that's left, go out wide, so you've rotated, and then they can create things. And it was just a mistake that caused them that one. But you go back through all these other games against Napoli when they got done 4-1. I think it was 4-1, wasn't it? 4-0?
Yeah.
4-1. Napoli always focusing on that left side. Same thing, Kvaratskhelia would be taking them on. It was always Gomez 1v1 with him, and Alexander-Arnold's the right back. It's because they're pulling them out of position with other things. It's quite clever what other teams are doing now. But as Klopp has said, and Pep Lijnders has said, everyone knows how Liverpool play. They figured it out long ago. Everyone knows it, but they weren't able to stop it before, because they were so intense and they were so good that teams could go through them. That Liverpool just keep going through them. They win the ball high up the pitch, and it becomes incredibly difficult to play against, because you just know they're going to come at you. Watford beat them once, I think, and they made it a back 6 or 7 to block out all the wide space, limit them through the middle, and they hit them on the counter. Was it Aston Villa once did them 7-0 or some weird result?
7-2 or
7-2 in the COVID season.
It can happen, these sorts of things. It's kind of random. But I think one thing you could say is that losing Sadio Mane makes a bit of a difference. It's maybe just to the eye test, but he would often pick and choose when to press, but his sense of timing of it was perfect. In the same way that Firmino, his sense of timing of when to attack space and when to drop into space is he's incredible at doing it. So now they changed their system to be more of a 4-4-2 diamond, which defends sort of like a front three from the very front, but they're letting people pass them either side. Nunes is not as good at pressing as you maybe want him to be just yet. He's not Mane, and Salah It still lets people down that right-hand side, and you've got Harvey Elliott behind him as the right-sided midfielder. So Elliott, when you look at his profile in FB Ref, in case anyone's not sure exactly how he plays, he's a very progressive ball player, but he can carry the ball. He's really neat and tidy. They compare him in the top players a lot like him. Pedri, he's one that comes up. A couple other players, they make him similar to like Dominic Szoboszlai, like a really talented Hungarian player. Also Martin Odegaard, also Stuart Armstrong, weirdly. But
not Jordan Henderson.
A really talented Scottish player. For people who don't know, that's...
I don't know how Armstrong get in there. But basically, Elliott is not as good. I think we've covered this before. He's not as good at covering the right space as Henderson has been in the past. So what Liverpool struggle with again, as Klopp has talked to a lot, is injuries. So they've had loads of injuries and players not fit. And because of injuries, he's had to play players who aren't quite fit, which then means that they're playing too much in a position they shouldn't be doing. And then it means that they are susceptible to injuries as well. And then it's a knock-on effect back down. Also, Van Dijk has been absolutely useless this season. He's one of the best centre-backs I've ever seen. And he's doing weird things. The second goal that they concede, which is the one that Klopp said that can't happen. You can see Match of the Day did a really good job in it. I think I love their analysis, and Match of the Day 2 especially as well. Like, he should be much tighter instantly to where the lad that scores is, but he keeps standing off everyone, like giving them like 2 or 3 yards. I don't know why.
Well, let me ask you this.
He's a different player to what he was.
Let me ask you this then, JJ. I mean, like we've covered a lot of these issues before. They seem to be consistent throughout the season so far. It's difficult to note areas that are improving, and yet there sort of remains this expectation at some point that Liverpool will just snap back into it. Steve Hankey makes the valid point that Liverpool currently mid-table. You know, I mean, forget about challenging for the title. At what point in the season, presumably it's the halfway point, do the club start to think, well, we need to target top 4 because we need Champions League football? There is a scenario where if Liverpool do not improve in the way that they're expected to, that they don't finish in the top 4.
Yeah, but I can't see a world where they get rid of Klopp in that, because you know that he knows how to turn it into a winning team. Like, he's not going to lose the dressing room. They all know exactly how good he is. It's individual error caused by tactical problems with the Alexander-Arnold thing's really complicated to deal with. He's clearly a great man manager. His recruitment has been excellent, whether that's all him or whether that's to do with other people in the club that brought him in. I don't know exactly the answer to that one, but you keep Klopp in because he can get you to that next level. It's just at the end of a cycle. They'll build a new team now. Maybe the recruitment they've got in isn't exactly what they needed it to be. They've had loads of injury problems. A lot of this, I mean, Liverpool fans might get wound up with it, but you just need to give them time, and there'll be a reset at halfway.
Yeah, after the World Cup, that's the thing, isn't it? When
it went wrong for him at Borussia Dortmund, when it all went wrong, please correct me if I'm very wrong here, but I think there was a winter break, and after the winter break, they were much better.
Yeah, they made a big thing of that winter break, if I remember correctly.
The Winterpause, John.
I think in that season. Yes, that's right. I think they sort of used it as a point where they're like, if we can get to this point, then everything will be fine.
Yeah.
Listen,
if you look around the league, though, like, I think this is really relevant, and I think it will only emerge in time. Antonio Conte at Spurs has talked about how there are periods of games where he feels his side can't compete in the way that he wants them to tactically. They have to kind of sit, restrict chances, and then dominate physically in the last half an hour. Klopp talked about this at the beginning of the season about conserving energy and managing the conditioning of players. Like, I know it's a really tough sell, and I don't expect people to kind of, I don't expect people not to respond to poor results, especially losing to Leeds at home. The reality is that once the World Cup's over, and once we're able to see this season in isolation for what it actually is and the challenges that it encompasses, I think that contextualizes things in a really interesting way, because no manager has ever had to do this before. Like, even previously, if you think about kind of the summer break, you think about how regularly the Champions League games have to come, how little coaching time there actually is during the season. That's a really big thing, especially if you've got new players. Like, if you're trying to not just work on set pieces, but team shape and like the kind of basics of, positional play. Or if you're trying to embed a Darwin Nunez into the team, and you've only got 2 days between games each week, it's incredibly difficult to do.
Yeah.
And once we get to March and April, and if these things are still happening, then okay, sure, it's a conversation. But I feel like it's a little bit of a tricky one to judge people for that right now.
Let me tell you, Seb, I went to the opera at the weekend because that's exactly the kind of person that I am. I saw a wonderful...
That is you. Like, this is kind of what you do. Like, to be honest, on a weekend, sometimes you'll phone me after you come back from the opera, and I just think, sake,
That's
just
right.
leave
Indeed,
me
I was at
alone.
the ballet
I don't want
the
to hear
week
about
before. But I was at the opera
Yeah.
this weekend. Sat in a box, of course. I wouldn't sit with the ordinary scum. And I was watching the the opera Tosca. And I thought to myself while you were just talking, well, indeed, if the actor who plays the role of Tosca, and a fantastic job she did, were to leave halfway through the season, they wouldn't just bring in another Tosca and put them on stage, sans rehearsals. Know what I'm saying? Everybody needs a little bit of time to adjust. And right now, Darwin Núñez is a fabled Tosca. You know what I'm saying? Was that a valuable analogy?
Yeah, but
was it worthwhile
it is,
taking
because
that journey?
if you put a new actor into that position and then all you did night after night was say, right, well, your performances in front of the live audience are okay, but I'm going to issue live corrections.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Every night. And all the opportunity you really have to learn from them is when you go back onto the stage the next night. It's quite difficult.
Oh.
You don't get any kind of empty theatre time or, time with your castmates to think, oh, how about this? And am I doing that okay? And let's build some chemistry and let's become friends.
Yeah.
Don't get quite as much of that now in football, especially not this season.
I agree.
Or maybe you put the goalkeeper up front.
Maybe. Indeed.
I think what's really interesting for me about Liverpool is it's the press, it's the off-ball stuff that doesn't work at the moment, and they've spent the whole season just experimenting with the press. So I think they start, obviously in previous seasons they pressed out of a 4-3-3 and it ends up looking pretty much like a 4-4-2 because one of the eights will push forward. They've tried that this season, it hasn't worked. They switched to a 4-4-2 allegedly to try and get Mohamed Salah in the central space a little bit more. That hasn't worked, and now they've gone to this sort of 4-4-2 diamond press as well. I think the issue is definitely that they can't control games enough in the way that they used to be able to build on them in an attacking sense. And so they're in a situation where not only are they not, because one of the things that Liverpool did really well in the past was they were a really good counter-pressing side. So if they turned the ball over, they would win the ball back quickly, and then they would be able to spring counter-attacking moments very, very quickly. If you look at their high regains numbers this season, they're much, much lower. So not only are you losing the ability to control the game, so you're defending better from the front, you're also losing a really big upside that you had from having a really nice transitional side that can score goals when you counter-press back. So they're losing both sides of those things. It just makes them a lot more average. Like the underlying numbers are good, but they're not really good. And I think that's the moment they're at now. Because the pressing doesn't work, they actually look so much worse than you might actually think. So it's easy to sort of look at players and be like, this player needs to do better here, this player needs to do better here. But I do think that the issue is with the system. It's to do with intensity, as you're saying, the lack of ability to be able to cause the sorts of problems they've been doing in the past. And yeah, the big question is like, how do you overcome that? Is it bringing in better personnel? Is it, like you say, having that nice winter break, which might allow a lot of them to sort of pick up a little bit more fitness-wise? But it's just something we see with high intensity pressing sides, is that you get 3 seasons and then it falls to pieces. Yeah. And we've seen Liverpool go through those rebuilds. They're going to have to go through that rebuild again. And I think
John, I only ever want to hear you say Winterpause. Okay, I don't ever want to hear you say the word winter break ever again.
Winterpause.
Thank you. Now we'll have a break now, but first let me read word for word the stuff that Steve Hankey has written in the plan here for you, so we can all hear the quality that Steve Hankey, his contribution to the podcast. Tosca is an opera separated into 3 acts, full stop, says Steve Hankey. Unai Emery is in his 2nd act of management in the Premier League. We'll talk about how we think it will go after a break. Let's have a break now. Thanks, Steve Hankey.
Thankles.
Okay. We've returned from a lovely break. Now, let's discuss Unai Emery, the new manager of Villa. John, who is this man who was here before?
Yeah, it's interesting with Unai Emery because he has a really good coaching record when he manages teams in Spain. Has a really good record coaching teams who are sort of, I suppose, mid-table. Gets a lot out of them. He has a reputation for getting Europa League finals and titles there as well. But he has had these stints abroad. So he had a time at Spartak Moscow in Russia, went really badly after he'd been at Valencia and done well there. Goes back to Sevilla, does really well there with them in terms of the Europa League as well. That gives him the job at Paris Saint-Germain, which I guess in fairness, no one really excels at that job because of the vagaries of being the Paris Saint-Germain manager. Goes to Arsenal and interestingly, doesn't do too badly, I don't think. He was only, I think, a point off Champions League spots in that season. They finished 5th, and then after that Arteta comes in and has two eighth place finishes. So, like, relatively speaking, had he been given more time, might have gone differently, but obviously lost the fan base, and so that became unworkable. Goes back to Villarreal, has really impressed there as well. And so he's leaving Spain again to come to another country. So I think for me, the big question is, how well will he do in this stint in the Premier League, and whether or not maybe Villa are a club that is maybe fitting the profile of the sides that he does better at, maybe than some of the other sides.
Well, you heard John say it, JJ. The big question is, what's he going to do at Villa? And your big answer, please.
Well, there's not an awful lot he can do straight away because he's got no time to coach them, basically, because there's a game every, I don't know, you'll have like 3 training days a week where you can actually work with them. And you put your best players on the pitch. And the best players, I think they had probably their best team on the pitch against Newcastle and got done 4-0. So there'll be lots of things to tweak. But Villa have a very medium team just now. They spent money, but like you have to spend big money just to get small gains now. 100 million might get you 1 or 2 extra places up the table, and then you have to have things go your way. You can't sign a centre back you're building your back line around, get injured for like most of the season straight away. That's just really unfortunate. Danny Ings is still a good goal scorer. Ollie Watkins is a decent player. Buendia, a decent player. Coutinho hasn't really been able to play the way we saw him at Liverpool for a long time. That's not the same guy anymore. Leon Bailey, decent player. Like the midfield's okay as well. Douglas Luiz, wanted by Arsenal, he's a decent player. But then you see errors by Tyrone Mings have let them concede goals recently, which aren't great. And he wasn't meant to be playing really this season. It was meant to be, I've forgotten the guy's name. Diego Carlos, thank you very much for that one. So like we saw the difference with like Steven Gerrard wasn't hugely impressive in Scotland. I think he won 1 out of like 9 trophies he could have won or something like that, and really should have done. I mean, he had a couple of unlucky cup finals where they dominated games, but let's see, he didn't win. Basically, was the problem. And Michael Beale was the architect there. We talked about this before. So when he lost Beale, he lost a lot of the things he wanted to be able to do. Tried to replace him, whatever. Gary McAllister's always been an assistant manager, but they played in a way that was making it very dull to watch. Villa have players who can play in a better way, but it's hard to play in an expansive attacking way if you don't have players that are better than everyone else's, and you're not full of confidence. So I think we'll see Emery come in and do like his team. Sometimes they look really boring to watch, especially in Europe. They're quite dull sometimes, but they're very pragmatic and get the job done. And I don't think any manager wants to play boring football. Like everyone wants to play attacking, expansive football. It's the way of every club in the world ever, of all time. Every club has a way, and it's always attacking, expansive football. Now, Emery wants to win games. He knows how to win in knockout tournaments as well. I wonder whether like the reason he does so well in Spain, as opposed to like when he goes to places abroad, is communication, because that seems to be one of the big problem when he was at Arsenal, and it, exemplified by people mocking him for the way he would do press conferences. But I remember him being quite difficult to understand sometimes. Now, obviously, I don't speak Spanish. This guy speaks English and I think other languages. That's not his first language. So well done to that. But then if you can't communicate your ideas completely across to a group of players, that's very complicated. And I think you see like people were talking about Diego Simeone at Atletico would maybe come to England at one point and do that. I don't know, because a lot of the stuff he does with the players is so motivational and so
Klopp talks about this, JJ. There's a really good bit in Rafa Honigstein's book, it's called Bring the Noise, when he's meeting FSG for the first time over in New York, I think. And one of his big concerns is whether his communication, whether his motivational abilities, whether they're going to transfer, whether they're going to kind of survive his learning of the English language. So it's a very relevant point. Yeah,
it's really complicated, and you don't want to sound like you're... I don't know, like the whole thing that started when you said "good evening" at the start of press conferences, right? So he would say that, and that became a kind of a meme for him. But it was quite funny him saying that, because no one really says hello, like, or good evening, and thanks for having me at a press, not even a press conference, what do they call them? Post-match interviews, stuff like that. Or pre-match, that sort of thing.
There's a good Stilberto Twitter thread, Tim Stillman, good Twitter thread on this, if you want to read more about it. I think you make a very good point, JJ, that here's someone who speaks an additional language to their mother tongue, and you barely even speak English, do you? So it's like, that's your main one. And you can't even pronounce words.
I don't even do that well.
Like, I don't understand.
I can't even talk good.
There you go. A nice bit of regionalism for the podcast there. Just to clarify, I don't think that. I think JJ's English is excellent. and
I've been speaking it a lot recently.
I love the Scottish accent as well. I do
Yes,
like it. I didn't mean any of the things I just said. You mentioned Arsenal there before, JJ. Arsenal 5-0. Nottingham Forest. What a big result. Shame I couldn't watch it on the TV, though. Seb, did you enjoy it in your other country where you pay almost no money to watch all the football that I can't watch for paying all of my money here in the country where the football's happening in? Hey, what now?
Yeah, it actually surprised me when I moved over. I mean, obviously the first thing you benefit from is there's no Saturday blackout for English football. There's no Saturday blackout at all. So I can watch the 3 p.m. kickoffs. But also, I think, and these are rough estimates because they seem to vary, but I pay about €45 a month for my Sky subscription. That's all the Premier League and Bundesliga games, with the exception of a couple of Bundesliga games, which are on DAZN, which also carries all the European football. So Italy, Spain, France, like all the major leagues, bit of Eredivisie on there as well. And I think I totted up the other day. I think I save about 55 euros a month on what I used to spend. Which is, and I remember there's a time
you get
when
all the football. It's not even just that you pay less.
I get it all.
You get it all.
I think when you leave England, or when you spend some time with people who are used to a different football culture on television, the idea that you're blocked out of certain games is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
And one of the things that German football gets really right is that the scheduling of Zweite Bundesliga games and Bundesliga games are in slots that don't overlap.
Yeah.
So you don't have a situation where, for instance, if I wanted to watch a Hamburg or St. Pauli game, then I have to not watch a Bundesliga game.
Yeah.
So ordinarily across a weekend, there is a sort of a tea time Zweite Bundesliga game, a late Bundesliga game, a lunchtime Saturday Zweite Bundesliga game, and so on and so forth throughout the weekend.
Yeah.
So you actually get the proper time slots, and also you get every single game that's played in those two divisions in Germany is on television every single week.
Can I make the point, Seb? You know, you said already when you move somewhere else, you start to realize how ridiculous it is that you don't get it. The reason I don't like it is, you know, you've just used Germany as an example, where famously fan engagement in football is very high and positive. And the fact that all the Bundesliga games are on television hasn't made a difference to that, right? So that's because as a result of the smart scheduling, like you said, not impossible for that to happen. Here we should acknowledge that there are more leagues in England, and that's often a thing which is cited as a problem, is that there are, you know, 4 professional tiers, and below that there's still non-league, and there's all these other considerations, is what they would say. But the thing that frustrates me about it is that these decisions were taken by just random dudes decades ago, like on the basis of almost zero information. And these are, I'm not saying these are exactly the same people, but similar decisions taken earlier than that. Football not for women, decided by similar type of people, or, you know, like other stupid things. What other stupid football decisions are there? I'm sure they can think of some other ones. Anyway, my point being that there seems to be no, like, you know, desire to have another look at these things that were decided, you know, years and years and years ago in entirely different scenarios by people who were skeptical of technology or skeptical of equality, or, you know, and yet we hold them up as they are these. Well,
there's a big thing now, Joe, with like club specific output. So like Scottish Premiership, I think they just signed a deal for like until 2029 or something like that. It's just as a load of stuff is starting to happen. I think it's probably inevitable that Amazon or Apple or someone, Google, will end up buying all the rights, and because everything's changed now. You can watch on your phone. We all know what mobile phones are and how iPhones work. But then, so that's one thing, and they've got loads of cash reserves where they can do that sort of thing. But like in Scotland, it might work. So Wrexham's interesting as well. Like the way they were talking about wanting to have that model where they can output through their own club thing, so everyone can watch every single game. And it might get to the point where in the future that's what happens. Every club has their own individual output, and it's a bit of a thing in Scotland at the moment because obviously Celtic and Rangers get the vast majority of views and bring the most eyes to that entire league. So, but in Sky, they have the rights to it. Sky Sports in Scotland have the rights to all the games, but they don't use all the games that they have rights to. So there's games that go just unused during that entire season because, I mean, frankly, people don't want to watch Dundee United versus Hibs. Like, they just don't. The numbers are so small, and I've seen the numbers. They are really small compared to what you get against Rangers and Celtic. So you're actually better off showing something else in that time slot for the amount of eyes you get onto it from that other thing, which is another weird thing, because maybe it'd be better for the clubs if they then had their own individual bit, because they still get eyes on it, but it's just not as much as you get for other things.
Well, because also like my formative experiences with the game were in the stadium. And no matter whether I agree with it or not, like over time, future generations, like it matters how much television coverage a team gets. Because if you say, for instance, you're a distant supporter, you live in a different continent, your decision or your level of engagement with a team is going to be dictated by how easy it is to watch the team itself. You can't say to someone now, given the choices and Netflix and given the kind of the alternatives that you have now across a weekend or a Tuesday or Wednesday night, you can't say that your only interaction with the team is going to be when you go through the turnstiles and take a seat. And like, I do think one of the key differences, I won't speak for Scotland because I don't know enough about Scottish football, but difference between England and Germany in terms of football is agency for fans. Like in England, you can have a situation where a TV company schedules Bournemouth against Manchester United at 8:00 on a Monday night. And people on Twitter complain about it and everyone gets upset about it. And people talk about how much money it costs them and nobody listens. Never really makes any difference. Like nobody actually pays any attention. In Germany, the fan is a stakeholder, quite literally, because of 50+1. And so you cannot do, first of all, you have the organization of the time slots, which are predetermined. But also you cannot distort the game in quite the same way. You cannot look after kind of commercial interests beyond a certain point before you start feeling some pushback. And that kind of control, that sort of agency guards against or cracks back against some of the things that Joe's been describing, which is quite right. Like you get people with opinions about the game 60 years ago, like can't show this because it will damage this. Okay, there's no evidence to suggest that. And yet still. I
think about the thing you said once, Seb, about like why this is actually part of the Tifo book, a chapter in the Tifo book. Why are there 11 players on a football team?
Yeah.
There's no reason. There just is. Like, because it was decided 100 years ago. And now it's just like that forever. Why are goals the size they are, despite the fact that like the average height of people has changed dramatically over the last 100 years? There's no reason. They just are because they always have been. And this kind of thinking, it just drives me insane. The idea that there is like, I'm sure there is a desire to look at it again from people within various organizations. And I don't mean to hold specific people to account over it. I just think it frustrates me when something like this happens, the Arsenal Forest game on a Sunday. We know the reason for it is because the game that was supposed to be televised then was moved to Saturday. There is a reason as to why. It's not an unusual thing that there's a 2 p.m. game on a Sunday that isn't shown. It's just normally that there would be another one that is shown. But every time this happens, it does bring these sorts of issues to light. I wish that there was like a concerted attempt to look at this again, to try to find smarter solutions to it, as they have done in Germany. We appreciate the point, of course, like we said before, that there are more considerations here. There are more professional leagues. There's more non-league football. Their argument would be that there is more to consider than there would be in some other European countries. But I don't think that means that it's impossible. And also, the starting point isn't neutral. That's the issue. Like, their worry would be, to change something now might make something worse. I think what's happening is already bad. I don't care if there's a different kind of bad. Let's have a different kind of bad and see how it goes.
But Joe, also like it's bigger than that as well, because like, how many times this season have we seen fixtures either moved or played in slots, which mean that away supporters quite literally cannot get home on the train that night. Yeah. It's outrageous. Yeah. Like, it's not even about change. It's about thinking. It's just about thinking, right? The train network in England, sorry, it is. I'm not saying the German one is much better. Sure. It's actually, fallen off to. I'm not being that guy. It's just, it's bad. It's overpriced. It costs an awful lot of money to go from one end of the country to another.
The train fans in this country are going to be furious with you now.
Do it. Because and yet no one ever takes any of these things into consideration. Like, okay, I'll maybe get a hotel when you go to watch football that night and then come back the next day. Okay, well, that's another £200-300, isn't it? And also, if you're going by yourself, that's expensive enough. What about, I said earlier, like my formative experiences came from going to stadiums. Well, that was a lot easier because it was a lot cheaper for people to take me.
Well,
like,
because you were driven in a Rolls Royce, weren't you? That was pulled by 17
I did.
horses.
And then also, like, when I say I went to the game, like a helicopter kind of flew above the pitch and just dangled me above the centre circle. Yeah. Like it's like a kind of very lo-fi version of that Mission Impossible scene when he infiltrates the. It was like
you were the precursor to the spider cam.
Yeah, but Imagine
just sprawled like a spider on the pitch.
Imagine,
I like that.
imagine the cost. Like, if you're a father and you want to take your daughter, your son, are you kidding me? Like,
But whose fault is this though, Seb? Because like it's not like the broadcasters, they have a product that they want to sell, and like for the 2,000 away fans that are traveling, it doesn't really matter to them because they're going to get like maybe 300,000 views. Actually, the TV views are not as big as you think they are in the UK. It's weird. So they're looking at that, and they're part of their schedule. Like they're not thinking, oh, what if there's a little boy there, he won't be able to get home.
Look, I want to watch the
that.
football, and I don't care what anybody else needs or wants. This is about me and what I can legally watch in my home.
Well, this is the thing. There are ways to watch.
There are no
these
ways,
games.
JJ. There are zero ways.
No, of course. I mean, I wish there were. If only there were, that would be a good thing. But there should be a point where the ways that don't exist to watch those do exist legally.
Okay, we have to move on. And I believe we're moving on to a break. That's good. We can all collect our thoughts.
Fucking hell, a break an hour and 5 minutes of record. We're
not finished yet. We're going to speed through the next 10 minutes.
God.
Yes, another 10 minutes of what's that, John? You want to go home?
Nothing.
That's
No,
right.
nothing.
No, listen. No one ever said when you started to work at Tifo that it was going to be easy. You know, actually, I think I did say that several times. I'm pretty sure I said that. Juventus. Let's discuss Juventus ever so briefly. There, yes. Who wants to do this? I don't know where I am in the plan. It's Seb.
I'll do
Seb, Juventus out of the Champions League group stages for the first time since the 2013-14 season. There is a scenario here after their 3-4 loss to Benfica that they don't even make Europa League. It's unlikely, but it's possible that they don't make Europa League. What on earth is going on with Allegri? Is it time? Is it done? What's going to happen?
Very difficult because it's not quite that definitive, Joe, because sacking Allegri is a very expensive business and Juventus
Sacking
are not
Allegri is on his way. Yeah. No?
But also, and this is from the excellent Swiss Ramble on Twitter, he wrote a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, that at the time, Juventus's wage bill was 100 million euros more than any other side in Serie A. Now, in between 12 months, they've obviously reduced that. They've sold a few players. They've offloaded guys like Bentancur, Kulusevski's on loan at Spurs, and he'll eventually join there permanently. But Dusan Vlahovic has gone there. Rabiot is still there. Szczesny is still there. Still some big earners there. And added to which, they're probably not going to, they're not going to win Serie A this season. Napoli look absolutely fantastic. If you haven't watched
Napoli
them,
yet to lose a game. 1-10, drawn 2.
Osman and Cavaradonna, as we're going to call him, look.
It's a great video about Napoli
There
up on
is.
Tifo IRL just
Go and
now.
have a look
Listen
at
to the
that
podcast.
for more Napoli-based
Absolute
propaganda.
legend presents it.
But Juventus obviously going to be denied the Champions League revenue, maybe denied the Europa League revenue, maybe they don't re-qualify for the Champions League. All of a sudden, that wage bill and the players who are still employed there is a problem. You're going to need to do more cost cutting after the World Cup. It's a very serious issue. But
they're a real Super
sure
League team, though.
My hairdresser
they?
blames Agnelli. He blames Agnelli.
I didn't hear that.
No, we both tried to make a joke.
My
at the
hairdresser
same time.
blames Agnelli.
Okay.
I'm not joking. He's dead serious.
What?
He says
Say it again.
Agnelli.
Your hairdresser, Agnelli.
Yeah.
Does your hairdresser say
Yeah.
Agnelli?
He says it's the Agnelli. Yeah, Agnelli. Well, he's Italian,
and he
from
says
Turin,
Agnelli.
so he's talking a lot about. Well, no, I say that because it's
right.
got a G in it. Because again, as we've established, I don't speak English good, nor other languages. A tiny bit of Greek. That's about it. That's a weird one. So he says it's the family in charge of the club. That's the problem. But then he never fires managers halfway through a season. Apparently,
not very Italian. I don't think I'd apportion blame in one single place. I think there's been some bad recruitment. I think there's some individual accountability within the playing squad. I think Allegri's return has been, to say the least, really, really underwhelming. And the whole thing just looks like a mess. I think the more concerning thing is, though, I'm not quite sure what the road back is. Because if you look around Italy, yes, I know Juventus have been without Chiesa, but Chiesa will come back in January, but he's not going to be who he was before he got injured immediately. So that's another probably 6 months down the line. Napoli look great. I think Roma under Mourinho have improved a little bit as well. Atalanta actually had a really good weekend as well. It's tricky. Agnelli, I think Agnelli probably isolated Juventus with the Super League stuff to a certain degree, and that's a problem. But yeah, it's a funny old situation.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for that update. One more update before we end today, and it was as it was written in David Ornstein's column on The Athletic this morning. There is a scenario in which Lionel Messi ends up at Inter Miami. I'm reading from David's piece now. Reports suggest PSG will push hard to extend his contract. He's also been linked with Inter Miami CF and a return to Barcelona. The most advanced of those options is understood to be Inter Miami, to the extent that the Major League Soccer franchise now expects Messi to arrive and hope that he will sign in the coming months. Apparently, discussions have been ongoing for a couple of years, and there is increased confidence that the proposed transfer will materialize. Now, we guess we're kind of, I don't know, now I'm saying it out loud, I'm not sure what I have to say about it, John, but, Messi in America, does it get more Hollywood?
Messi in America.
These Americans need to tidy because it's messy in America. What do you think, John?
I don't really care.
He wants to go home. Look at him. Can I say, he'll not go to America, will he? He'll go to Barcelona. I just can't. They'll find a way to get him back. I just don't think. Also, he's playing
well enough to stay in.
Man, he's
Europe.
Almost like the best as I've ever seen him. He's a slightly bit slower. He's amazing. Have you seen him this season? It's ridiculous, the stuff he's doing. He's so he's my favourite player of all time. He's the best player of ever all time.
I feel like we spend all our time talking about Ronaldo when Messi's just out there just still being great. But
he's in France, John.
It's almost like do you know what it is?
Yeah, I suppose.
So I love the US Office, and I didn't watch the last ever episode for years because I didn't want it to end. This sounds really stupid, but I didn't want to watch because then it would end. You know, that there'd be a final point to it. Otherwise, it just existed forever in my mind, and in a way, because it's on Netflix or whatever, and time is not linear. It never ends, really. It's always there available. But the thing with Messi is that I don't watch him as much as I should, even though I know I should watch him, because it's almost as if I watch him like, that might be the last time I get to watch him. Obviously, I won't. I'll get a few more years. But it's one of the most special little creatures have ever existed.
I have a habit of going to see sports people who I really love. And I make an effort of going to see them because I'm like, you never know, it's going to be the last time you can see them. And when I do, they just play really badly the time I did it. I did the same with Ronnie O'Sullivan, but this was like 5 years ago, and he's still going strong, obviously. But I went along and he just got battered by Mark Allen in the
midfield.
In the midfield, he was all over the place. And then I went to see Messi and ended up watching Rodri in the Man City midfield because he was more impressive to me. So I have a really bad track record.
O'Sullivan would definitely be a similar position to Messi on the football pitch, I think. He'd probably play off the right.
I could see him in a wide area. He does a lot of running, doesn't he? So he's probably quite.
You go into the attacking half spaces, and I think because he's very two-footed, I would imagine.
But he would get sent off a lot, I reckon. I feel like, or even just walk off himself. He'd just do something that he didn't like and be like, "This is so bad."
Maybe more like a Zidane type. It's got a bit.
Well, let's end on a note similar to this. I was going to say I went to see I went to see Moon Age Daydream, the David Bowie documentary.
The Oscar, the Tosca.
Well, I saw that as well, John, the Tosca. But I also saw the Moon Age Daydream, the David Bowie documentary. Very good, very fun. But I was watching him in the documentary footage in the 70s, all dressed up as Ziggy Stardust, singing in front of all these people. And I remember thinking, I've never seen anything like that in real life. That's a shame. I've never seen anyone at the top of their game. You know, I've seen big stars of the music and acting and stuff, but I've just sort of seen them on the way down, or So, and I'm wondering, JJ, John, Seb, what's the most like peak kind of zeitgeist thing that you have seen in your lives?
Oh, I like that question. I bet the other two will want some time to think of it. I know straight away it's
so it is Messi.
I saw Messi play.
Yeah. You can choose anything.
Messi playing. Yeah, I've seen him play twice. I've seen him play for Argentina versus Croatia at Upton Park, weirdly. And it was amazing. Every time he gets the ball, if you haven't seen Messi play, just do everything you can to try and see him. Because the whole crowd, you feel it. You feel him on the ball. It's so odd. Everyone sort of rises. It's amazing. You just feel like excitement whenever he gets it. And I saw him play for Barcelona as well. And Pedro scored a bicycle kick. It was ace against La Real. It was cool.
I was at the Leicester City game against Everton when they lifted the Premier League. When Andrea Bocelli.
Oh wow!
That's so good.
You will like this joke because it's about opera. But Andrea Bocelli was there and he sung, that song that opera singer sings, Nessun Dorma.
Yeah.
And they lifted the Premier League.
I like
trophy.
that. That's pretty cool that you were there. What about you, Seb?
God, this is going to be underwhelming. I can't match that at all.
You don't have to pick a football thing, but you can pick whatever you want.
Pick a football one. When I was younger, I always weirdly expected really, really good players to be much bigger than everybody else on the pitch.
Yeah.
And I remember going to see Jurgen Klinsmann play for Spurs for the first time in a game they lost at home 2-1 to Wimbledon. Well done, Effa Nkoku, for ruining that for me. But you go there and you have this expectation that like they're going to be 8 foot tall. And there's just these tiny little guys, everybody's who all just look the same. And I did the same. I got to see Eric Cantona once when he was playing for Man United, and I had that same thing. Like because of the way he held himself on the pitch, you expect he's 10 foot tall, he's massive, he's going to be like a kind of a character from the Trojan War, right? And it's very interesting. But I remember even then he still had this amazing aura, just the way he used to walk around the pitch, and I'll never forget that. Yeah. It's no Andrea Bocelli, but it was still pretty cool.
Can I add just one more? Because I was interesting. I wanted to do not a football one. I used to go and see Biffy Clyro play all the time. So when they used to play in front of they were always quite busy, but they did the work, man. They did all the work, and I saw them all the way through from like the first album right through to. I mean, they had a stop after. Is it Finityland? Finityland was the third one, wasn't it? I can't remember what it was called. So I saw them all the way through there, and so Ruben were supporting them. Sometimes I loved Ruben, but then I also used to see Frightened Rabbit like during the Midnight Organ Fight era, when they were absolutely the best at that in the world ever. Idlewild as well, so them at their peak.
What's the name of the singer from Idlewild? He had a really funny name.
Roddy Wimble.
Yeah.
Roddy Wimble.
Yeah.
Nice.
He's great, man.
Good singer.
So
I like his voice. Yeah.
Listen to the second album.
I served David Mitchell in a pub once. Laughed about that the whole way through. He had a funny face. And Gandalf. What's that guy's name? Gandalf?
Gandalf, the wizard. Yeah, he came in. Gandalf the wizard came into your bar. Gandalf the wizard.
You just...
I made Hugh Grant swear.
Yeah, he had
once,
all boglins with him, and he was hanging out, and that's why you love all that goblins and stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, I love goblins. Yeah, Timothy Spall was in there once. Speaking of goblins, just because he's got a kind of small, sort of hunched, sort of that was rude. I like Timothy Spall.
What a great way to round off the spooky.
Now let's end. But first, I will say. Please check out the Tifo book, How to Watch Football. You can order that online, Waterstones and all good bookshops and stuff. People from America asking, it will be available. Just bear with us.
You can get it on Kindle too, Joe.
You can also get it on a Kindle. It's available everywhere, and it's RRP's at £10, so it's not hugely expensive. It's accessible and affordable. I will say thank you to Mr. Toad, JJ Bull the Bullard. I'll say thank you to Seb Stafford-Bloor, Steve Hankey, of course, Don in the background, and John. Let's end on your anecdote about how you made Hugh Grant swear, and nobody say anything after John's finished. That'll be the end, okay? John, over to you.
So I was at university at St Andrews in Scotland, which is famous for the golf, and they used to have a regular pro-am golf tournament, and you would mean that you would see many famous people there. Anyway, I was just walking down the street, walked around a corner, walked full pelt into Hugh Grant, and he went, bloody hell. And that was it. That's the story.
That's the end now. Well, that's the end. Everyone stop. See you next week. Bye.